Right, so amidst hundreds of drones and missiles aimed at Israel late last night, our time, coming from Iran, Israel has weathered the worst of the assault, though damage and casualty details are still being collected at the time of writing. Yet despite all of this, the entire situation is being cited as a win for Israel and a win for Netanyahu, as it has distracted and taken off the main news agenda what they are still doing in Gaza, and what they were actually doing whilst this retaliatory response from Iran for the destruction of their consulate in Syria was going on. And whilst Iran is now saying they are satisfied they have responded as they said they would, and on a scale appropriate in their view to what was done to them, is Netanyahu the sort to let this go now when he wants that wider war and wants to drag more countries into this mess? Right, so as we woke up this morning having heard about the drone and missile launches from Iran heading towards Israel, as was the situation our time when we went to bed, we were honestly dreading and wondering what scale of devastation we could have been looking at today. But for the most part, it seems that Israel have weathered the attack that headed their way. Not only was their Iron Dome air defence system effective, but they also had the likes of France supporting them, as Al Jazeera reporting, by the way, of air defence support too. With the Tory graph reporting that US and UK jets were involved as well, although curiously Al Jazeera's live updates of the situation are not reporting their involvement. However, the US was specifically warned not to get involved after all, and Rishi Sunak here in the UK doesn't tend to jump until Biden says he can. If you thought Brexit brought independence, here's a classic example of why that is actually drivel. Though their action was apparently confined to the Syria-Iraq border, whose airspace drones and missiles were passing through, so perhaps they could argue they were defending that airspace instead, perhaps. At any rate, rocket attacks came in not just from Iran, but also southern Lebanon and Yemen, as well as Iraq. So very much a coordinated attack, it seems. Most of the drones and missiles were intercepted. Mr. Pointy Daniel Agari took the camera and announced that 99% of some 300 drones were brought down by Israel. But those that punched through will have caused damage, and we know some certainly have punched through because, as ever, video footage on social media taken by those there has shown that. All of Iran's targets were apparently of a military nature as well. They claim they haven't targeted residential areas, and one area specifically that comes up in mentions is Nevatim. Now, I've mentioned Nevatim Air Base previously because it has been the destination for a great many mysterious US flights coming from the UK airbase on Cyprus, RAF Akrotiri. And the suspicion is that this airbase has been used heavily to transfer arms from the west to Israel. So any damage there, still to be determined, certainly the scale of it, could hamper Israel's ability to receive arms, perhaps. We can certainly hope that that is the case. So all in all, it looks like limited damage was caused, which, given the likelihood of civilian casualties in such events, I think we should all be thankful for. But the rate at which the attack was launched is worth mentioning too, because this wasn't like an all-out assault with overwhelming force. This was more a show of force, because the drone attacks were spaced out, slow-moving. They allowed time for defensive measures to be taken by Israel. Iran says it now deems the matter concluded. Its response last night, they say, is proportional in its view to the attack Israel made on its consulate in Syria. But it has also warned that if Israel make another mistake, as they put it, as their mission to the UN put it in those words, the response next time will be far more severe. Now, certainly Iran have far more firepower than they displayed last night, and could certainly deploy it at a more alarming rate. However, this is the language of de-escalation here. This is the language of drawing a line under this now. This is Iran saying, we've done our bit, we've said our piece on this matter, we have responded appropriately, and that is that. And this is something Israel and its allies really should be taking on board. And it should be being reported more widely that this is Iran's position currently. Because, frankly, Israel's allies are not naturally taking it in this way at all. Israel's foreign minister, for example, Israel Katz, has said, "We said that if Iran attacks Israel, we will attack it back, and this is still effective. We need to deepen our cooperation with our allies. I will lead a political attack against Iran." Oh, the bus here, sunshine. You attack them. You attack their consulate. You're trying desperately to justify that as a legitimate target, but it wasn't, and it never can be. The fact you have tried this now has actually emboldened others, because just 5 days after Israel bombed the Iranian embassy in Damascus, the Mexican embassy in Ecuador was raided in a move reminiscent of Julian Assange being dragged out of the Ecuadorian consulate in London to seize the former vice president of Ecuador, who had sought asylum from Mexico against corruption charges. So where will this end now? These places are supposed to be sovereign soil of the nation whose embassy it is. Each of these instances of attacking them, they're declarations of war. Back to Iran, though, where they wish to draw a line under this now, have told Israel to take heed that they won't be pushed around by them or anyone backing them. Other world leaders are not de-escalating tensions again by backing Israel still over this. Ursula von der Leyen of the EU put out a tweet saying, "I strongly condemn Iran's blatant and unjustifiable attack on Israel, and I call on Iran and its proxies to immediately cease these attacks. All actors must now refrain from further escalation and work to restore stability in the region." I wouldn't call targeting their embassy and killing 13 people there unjustifiable, Ursula, but this is the narrative of so many world leaders this morning, acting as though the attack from Iran came out of nothing, because it was not an unprovoked attack. It was a response to an unprovoked attack, an attack by a nation, by a government you support. So leaders like von der Leyen are escalating this with language such as they are using. This emboldens Israel again, and it proves Iran's point. Rishi Sunak, as another example, issued a statement saying, "I condemn in the strongest possible terms the Iranian regime's reckless attack against Israel. Iran has once again demonstrated that it is intent on sowing chaos in its own backyard. The UK will continue to stand up for Israel's security and that of our regional partners, including Jordan and Iraq. Alongside our allies, we are urgently working to stabilise the situation and prevent further escalation. No one wants to see more bloodshed." Except you, apparently, with that inflammatory statement which literally incites further escalation, because Iran was defending itself. Keir Starmer, our apparent leader of the opposition and likely next PM, who owes an awful lot to the Israel lobby, as we know, to be where he is today, also offered a statement, part of which says, "We condemn the Iranian regime's decision to subject Israelis to these unacceptable attacks. The international community has been united in urging restraint, and we regret that yet again Iran has chosen a different dangerous path." Another escalation by excusing what Israel did in Iran that instigated this. Leaders of many other countries have said similarly, and all this will do is embolden Netanyahu further, a man who wants Iran dragged into this conflict because he thinks it'll drag the US in. Iran has warned Biden that if he does get involved here, then their air bases, which literally surround Iran throughout the Middle East, cannot have their safety guaranteed, so much the same as they said to the US ahead of last night's retaliation. Biden has now apparently told Israel that the US will not take part in any offensive operations against Iran directly, seemingly taking heed of Iran's warnings here. But I highly doubt this will put Netanyahu off, and when push comes to shove, the US will probably help Netanyahu again, at least in terms of defending itself against whatever they do next. But as much as Iran potentially being dragged into this situation is a cause for significant worry, for others it is being viewed as a distraction, because whilst we worry about the ramifications of Iran becoming a full-blown player in this growing Middle East issue, instigated by Israel, it is what else Israel are doing that falls off the news agenda. And in that regard, some comment on this being a victory for Netanyahu because whilst we talk about Iran, we stop talking about Gaza, and whilst these missile attacks were happening last night, what exactly was happening in Gaza? Well, 43 more Palestinians were murdered and another 62 were injured. The Nazirat refugee camp was targeted by the IDF, resulting in people being taken to Al-Orda and Al-Aqsa hospitals. More residential buildings and more agricultural land was also being destroyed in the north of Gaza because Israel carried on there regardless, all while we were looking in Iran's direction. More escalation. Do I think Netanyahu is done with Iran? No, I fear not, especially when some of his more batshit hard-right coalition partners are still talking about more. For example, as we so often come back to on this channel, the Security Minister of Israel, Itamar Ben-Gvir, a complete head case, has, for example, said in response to last night, "Impressive defence so far, now we need a crushing attack." Stick him at the front then, please. Ahead of all of this, we were talking about the previous night's Hezbollah attack on Israel as being possibly the beginning of an Iranian assault. So it seems it turned out to be true. But if Lebanon's involvement hasn't drawn your attention yet, watch this video recommendation next, which explains all, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.